About 8 years ago, I found myself standing at a large pulpit under a glow of blue and purple strobe lights. Before me sat 2,000 Unitarian Universalists, the beams of the lights bouncing off of their heads. And as I took those small, heavy steps toward the pulpit to give the invocation at the service of the Living Tradition at General Assembly that year, my knees shook, feeling the weight of this exciting and also terrifying responsibility. Just a high schooler at the time, I was charged with writing words to open this momentous service. It's a service that ministers and other credentialed religious professionals mark important milestones in their lives. Ministers who are just starting out their careers, as well as those who are retiring, are seated up on the stage together. And likewise, ministers who have earned full fellowship, as well as those who have died in the past year, are celebrated, with their names and photos projected for the entire gathering of thousands of people. While my knees shook that day as I stood at the pulpit delivering my opening words, they shook for another reason beside my own nerves. For me, this was the recognition of a commitment that I was making, or even a commitment that I had already made. It was a moment when I realized that I'd one day hoped to be back up on that stage, recognizing my call as a Unitarian Universalist minister. My knees shook with the power and weight of what this service meant, of what our callings can mean to us at times when we least expect them. Callings not just in the sense of us as ministers, but our callings for all of us who are Unitarian Universalists and human beings as we go about our lives. This was the service to honor the living tradition that we all share in, a service to mark the commitment that we've made to this faith, as well as our commitments to one another and our commitments toward making a better future for our shared world. Now, while I still have yet to take my place upon that stage next year, only this time, no longer as a high schooler, but as an ordained minister, I've learned that these sorts of hard and challenging moments really help me to understand more about what's underneath the surface when I'm faced with hard and terrifying decisions. I've learned that for me, shaking knees often point to something for me to look at in greater depth. This moment of standing up there, knees shaking, is an experience that I've carried with me on my journey within this faith. When I'm faced with hard choices, I'm reminded of that moment, gripping to the sides of the pulpit as I take the weight in of this commitment that I'm about to make. In our lives, we are often faced with hard decisions that we don't always know the clear answer to. Many of you have felt similar shaking knees moments when faced with thinking about an upcoming move, choosing between new jobs or positions, deciding on undertaking a big project with many different outcomes or different directions that it might end up in. This time of pandemic has only made these decisions that much harder to navigate. All of these hard choices, as if they weren't challenging enough, now carry with them the shadows of these times, the challenges of our virtual worlds that we navigate, of needing to make difficult, sometimes gut-wrenching decisions, where we sometimes don't know where the path is leading us. Some of us might approach this very methodically, putting all of the data that we can gather into a spreadsheet, listing out all the different pros and cons, and compiling this very large list of every possible detail. Some of us might prefer to just trust the process, to go with our gut and just make the best decision possible that we have in that moment. The only challenge with these types of decisions are that they are never really easy choices. With hard decisions, there isn't one single right answer. Hidden in the back of this answer key of some manual on how to live your life that you have to look up. Even after listing out all the different pros and cons, or even going with our first gut impulse, hard decisions are hard because it isn't clear where the path is leading. Anything from choosing schools to deciding on larger life plans can sometimes bring us back to those moments where we find ourselves knees shaking, unsure of what the future might hold. It can feel like there's this immense weight hanging overhead with no knowledge of how it all plays out, or knowing if the choice that we've made is really the right choice. Our reading this morning that Andy read for us highlights this challenging landscape of making hard decisions. In it, authors Megan Keane and Sylvie Douglas name for us why these decisions feel so impossible. They draw a distinction between big decisions and hard decisions. On one hand, some big decision can feel easy, especially if the outcomes are crystal clear. These decisions are big choices in our lives, but not the ones that leave us in that place of internal wrestling or discernment. Instead, it's the hard choices that are, well, hard to navigate. As they write, one alternative is better than the other in some respects, the other alternative is better than the other in other respects, and neither seems at least as good as the other overall. This lack of clarity is what makes it as tough as it is to decide. And it reminds me of standing up at that pulpit at General Assembly or other moments of this journey. For example, like making the decision to start my ministry with you all as an intern minister almost 2 years ago. I ran through the hard choices in my mind. On one hand, I could just wait until later, doing a full-time internship after wrapping up all my different coursework and requirements. And then on the other hand, I could step up to do this internship while in school, doing it part-time for 2 years, carrying many other classes and responsibilities with me. Now, what's funny is I still remember standing before you all here on my first Sunday, my knees also shaking in realizing my commitment that I was making to this special. And thinking about what made me decide, it was realizing and noticing where commitment was ultimately calling me. It was noticing the power of commitment in choosing this path, in choosing to serve these people at this time, even with not knowing what the future might possibly hold for us. And believe me, the future had a lot to hold for us. It involved peeling back the layers of my thoughts until I could see clearly what it was that I valued and who it was that I was pledging myself to become. Ultimately, commitment helped me to decide to be here with you all, even with all of my trepidations and wonderings of whether I was ready enough or up to this great task. Commitment is something that I return to over and over again when I feel like I am stuck and I don't know where I'm going. So in your life, I have questions for you. Where do you feel yourself called? What causes you to act? Where do you notice those moments of internal discernment and wrestling? And what commitments are holding you close? And what commitments do you hold close to your own heart? Perhaps some of you feel commitment to family or to loved ones, to children, parents, or even people within your own chosen family. Perhaps social justice and reforming harmful systems is what calls you to action and keeps you going. For some of you, maybe it's a commitment to this place, to this sacred community where you've covenanted with one another to nourish and sustain this place with your care and support. Moments of making hard choices about our lives reveal to us what it is that we've pledged ourselves to. And in making these impossible choices, we learn about the fire deep within each one of us, where we see our hunger and our passion meet along the journey. To revisit a meditation that I shared with you to open the service titled Spilling the Light by Reverend Soto, who identifies as non-binary and uses they and them pronouns. They ask us this important question: to what have we promised ourselves? We've pledged ourselves to this moment in time and place, to this community, and even tenderly interconnected this planet. We promise ourselves to the idea that we are each and all human beings, And we promise that there is something moving between us that we cannot tame and we cannot measure. What flame we keep inside us cannot light the way. The light must spill to shine. In our Time for All Ages that Ginny read for us so wonderfully, Jabari was also asking himself these questions. Standing there at the edge of the diving board, he notices how far the water is away from him, with the great distance between himself and the ground below. He spends a lot of time deciding on what special jump to do, taking his time, making sure that he's had enough time to stretch, taking lots of different breaks. Overall, Jabari was scared. He wasn't sure he was ready or up to the task to make that hard choice to jump off the diving board into the deep. And in the end, Jabari is reminded of his commitment to himself, to trusting that what he knows about himself is true, resulting in this great big splash into the pool at the end. The story offers us a reminder for when we're faced at looking off at big diving boards, or looking off at scary pulpits that we're approaching, with a hard decision that we have to make. And at times, we might feel scared too, like Jabari, with whether we are making the right choice or even taking the right risk. We learn that though Jabari has his commitment to being himself, to trusting that choice to jump, this is ultimately what makes his decision clear. And we learn that trusting our commitments helps us to make our own big splashes in the world around us, shining out this light from our commitments and values that we have to share with others. Now, we are at a time in our faith where, and within our world even, where we must be prepared to ask ourselves this very tough question: to what have we promised ourselves? Unitarian minister Reverend James Luther Adams, a Harvard professor and former UUA president, as well as an instrumental leader within our early faith, he also believed heavily in our promises and commitments that we make. He explained that our deepest commitments are often the hardest for us to evaluate, especially when faced with difficult choices about who we are and who we are yet becoming. In his book, An Examined Faith, he explores what our religious commitments mean to one another and to society at large. He writes, "The first characteristic of human collective existence is commitment. That is, making a promise. Promising is a feature of meaningful human existence, and the covenant is for the individual as well as for the group. The covenant of social responsibility is one that is rooted in the meaning of human existence." So, friends, when you are next faced with a hard decision, whether staring off a diving board or standing there, knees shaking, undertaking the quest of figuring out what it is exactly to what that you've promised yourself, my hope is that you'll return to your commitments, that you'll return to what it is that holds you close and set your mind and soul ablaze. As we continue to wrestle in the midst of these strange times, may we not lose sight of what it is that calls out to us. May we not be daunted by the challenges and hard decisions that lay before us, both within our lives and in the lives of our uncertain future. May we remember our covenants, our promises to ourselves, and the greater covenant to one another. And may these commitments be the fire in our minds and hearts, bringing us deep assurance of that flame that stirs within. And may this flame always guide our spirits home. May it be so, and amen.